Hi, I'm Jennifer, a clinical hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. I work with all sorts of clients from all around the world, but I do specialise in helping people manage their chronic skin conditions because that's what I've got personal experience with. So I've had eczema on and off throughout my whole life, and the last 5 years I've been going through topical steroid withdrawal. But if you want to hear more about that, there's a link to a different video in the caption below, because this one is actually all about your brain. Everything I do is rooted in neuroscience. When you understand how your brain works and why it works that way, it becomes easier to create change and have self-compassion along the way. Let's start by drawing your brain from a sideways view. Here at the front of your brain, you have what is called the prefrontal cortex. So this is the bit that makes you you. It's where your personality is stored. It's the logical part that interacts with the world around you. It's attached to the cerebral cortex. And this is like the library within your brain. So everything that you learn and experience, both good and bad, all get stored in your library. These two parts of the brain together make up what I call the intellectual brain. These are the parts that evolved most recently in our human history. And when we're working from here, we tend to be pretty good at coming up with the right answer, coming up with solutions to problems in a rational and logical way. Generally, it tends to also be a positive place to be. However, we're not always working from that part of the brain. We also have what I call the primitive brain. Now, the primitive brain doesn't care if you're happy or confident or achieving your goals. All it cares about is keeping you alive. It's very emotional because its priority is your safety and your survival. The central and most influential part of this primitive brain is the amygdala. That is your fight or flight response. We also have the hippocampus, and this is where we store all of our sometimes inappropriate learned habits and behaviours. And we have the hypothalamus. This is like the pharmacy or the chemist in your brain. So if you're having a good time chatting with your friends, you're producing serotonin and dopamine, those feel-good chemicals. But if you're thinking about the deadline at work that you're not sure whether you're going to meet or not at the end of the week, then we're producing our stress hormone, cortisol, and maybe adrenaline as well. Now, the other things that happen when we struggle with stress is, of course, we have our stress hormone cortisol that kicks off. But in our primitive days, we'd be kicking off cortisol to run away from a predator, okay? And then when you're safe from the predator, the cortisol would be able to leave your system, the adrenaline would calm down, you've run away and you've burnt it off. Nowadays, in our everyday modern life, the cortisol stays in our body because there's so many different stresses. And when it comes to skin conditions, cortisol actually slows down wound healing and increases inflammation in the body. This then kicks off the histamine response. And as you might know from taking antihistamines, histamine is the thing that then makes the itching worse, which causes more stress. And so this is your stress itch cycle. And where a lot of people go wrong is they try to cut it off at this point, and they try to just have enough self-control that they don't itch. That's almost impossible. You are literally fighting chemicals within your body. So whilst we can talk about coping mechanisms to help reduce this part of the cycle, what you actually want to do is look at it over here and change the way that you respond to stress so that you don't have so much cortisol in your body to start with, and then you don't have the histamine response. Now, back over to our primitive brain. I already mentioned the idea of having a predator attack you, right? So if you imagine that you were walking down the street, you're in your logical brain, you're feeling quite good, you're proud of yourself for getting outside, you bump into a predator. Then you're going to be moving very quickly from that logical, positive brain where you're in control into your fight or flight survival brain. Your palms might get sweaty, your heart rate's going to increase, your stomach might be churning, maybe your IBS kicks off, and you're running off down the street away from that predator. Now, of course, if that was to happen, that's a perfectly normal, correct response. The problem is, our brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. So if you think back to a traumatic or upsetting time, it's as if it's happening again. And when we go through life, sometimes we can accidentally train our brain to see predators where there aren't predators. So maybe the idea of going to a social event, if you have social anxiety, or the idea of having a shower, if you have a painful skin condition, right? These are predators for our brain, and our body will respond accordingly. When our primitive brain takes over, we end up being extremely negative, always seeing things from the worst possible perspective, because it has to for your self-preservation. It's very obsessional, and it's always going to refer to your previous patterns of behaviour. Whatever you did yesterday, whether it was cancelling that social event last minute or attacking your skin, that kept you alive. So now you've taught your brain that's a good thing to do, and you should keep doing it. Now, in our primitive brain, we respond with either anxiety or panic, depression or low mood, and anger or irritability. And all three of these things are created by negative thoughts, negative thinking. I know that sounds a little simplistic, but what I mean by that is it's not actually the situation you're in that is causing you to feel this way. It's the thought patterns in your own mind. For example, let's say you're going to a social event and you feel that rising anxiety. You're starting to think, what if everyone looks at me? What if I'm not dressed appropriately? What if there's not food I can have? They're all going to judge me. Actually, if everybody else was reacting in that same way, we can say that it's the situation that's caused that. But we know that people don't respond like that. Not everyone in that situation is reacting like you. So therefore, it must be your thought patterns that are causing that. All of your negative thoughts are collected, and they are all stored in what I like to call your stress bucket. Okay? Here's a bad drawing of a bucket. And your stress bucket is actually, technically speaking, up here in your hippocampus. All right? Now, everything within your stress bucket is going to build up. Every negative thought, whether it's about that deadline at work, whether it's about the people judging what you're wearing to that social event, the pain that you're in because of your skin condition and never knowing when it's going to end, all of that stuff fills up your bucket. And therefore, everything inside your bucket becomes the fuel. This is the fuel for your anxiety, depression, anger, your insomnia, addictions, and phobias. What we need to do is learn to empty your stress bucket. Because the lower your stress bucket is, the better we can cope with day-to-day life. The happier we are, the braver we are, the more motivated we are and focused, and the more we're working from our intellectual brain. Otherwise, what happens is you end up sticking in that primitive brain space where you're encouraged to think negatively, and then you get stuck in this loop. So what I do in hypnotherapy is I teach people how to empty their stress bucket and give them the tools so that they can empty their stress bucket in the future as needed, as well as breaking out of this stress itch cycle. If you want to learn more about how to do this, you can book a free consultation with me using the link below, or you can drop me an email with any further questions you might have. And in the free consultation, it's just a really casual chat where we talk about your goals, what you would like to achieve, and how hypnotherapy can help you get there.